going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today I want to talk a little bit about development within MLB The Show franchise mode, and I want to talk about a good tool that we now have to gauge how much our players can develop based on their development rating within the game. We talked about this tool a little bit last year, but what I'm going to talk about is the new depth chart feature within franchise mode, and I'm going to utilize that to gauge how development works within the game and to show you guys how much you can expect a certain player to develop if they have A, B, or C potential. So in order to get to the depth chart feature, you're going to have to go to your main page of whatever franchise you're in. You're going to scroll up to this page at the top with the clipboard and the pen/pencil. You'll click on that, scroll down once, and go to the depth chart. And here we'll get a picture of what our team looks like currently, and you will also be able to press the R1 button or right bumper button to go over to future years, and in those future years you're still going to see overalls for those future years. And so this is not a perfect tool to see what your players can be at every single position, because some of these players will not be under contract in certain years. And so you can see at center field, when I go to 2025, Bryan Reynolds won't be under contract, or they're projecting that he's not going to be around for the team, so I can't see what his overall is going to be in 2025 or what they project it out to be. And that is one point that I need to make clear before we get into this video, is that these are projections for ratings for these players. This is not taking into account that some of these players may perform very poorly and they may not develop at all. They may develop little, if at all, within franchise mode, and that is a very realistic possibility. However, this is a good tool to gauge where players can get to, and the other thing to factor in is if these players play really, really well, they can play beyond these ratings. Their devs can go up, and their ratings can go up even further and even quicker than you see here on the screen. So what I want to first look at here are a couple of A potential players. We'll specifically focus in today's video on Bryan Reynolds, center fielder, third baseman Ke'Bryan Hayes, as well as a prospect in catcher Henry Davis. All of these players have A potential. They play different positions, and they're going to be at different levels of the organization. Ke'Bryan Hayes and Bryan Reynolds are already up at the major leagues, whereas Henry Davis is down in the minors right now. We also want to keep track of their overalls as we go through here. So we can see that right now Bryan Reynolds is an 86, Ke'Bryan Hayes is an 84, and Henry Davis down there at the bottom is a 76. It's very interesting to look at the progression for these players, because into year 2, it is projecting that Bryan Reynolds will take a massive jump to a 94 overall, while Ke'Bryan Hayes will take a jump to an 87 overall, and Henry Davis will take a jump to a 79. And here we can start to get a look at what the pretty standard development for some of these players is going to be. We get a pretty consistent increase for both Ke'Bryan Hayes as well as Henry Davis. They both went up 3 overall points, from a 76 to a 79 and from an 84 to an 87. However, Bryan Reynolds here went all the way up from his 86 rating to a 94, and that is taking into account his season's performance. Bryan Reynolds so far in this season is playing phenomenal. He's playing lights out offensively and defensively with 15 home runs, a 333 average, and really good defensive stats. So they're projecting him to advance further than most traditional A potential players. However, we are seeing a pretty standard uptick from the other players that have A potential of 3 overall points. And so that is to say that the system is generally going to give your A potential players about 3 overall increase almost regardless of their performance. It could be a little bit less if they really underperform. It could be significantly more if they overperform. You're probably going to have the widest ability to go over that standard development point with A potential players because of the fact that they have that A potential. Where things do get a little bit more wonky is when we start to go below A potential. With A potential players, you can almost expect them to develop no matter what their performance is. They're going to be granted increases to their rating despite their performance. Now again, that rating can fluctuate quite a bit, and the amount that they increase can fluctuate quite a bit, but it fluctuates even more as we go down in development. So if we take a look at B potential players such as Mitch Keller, Michael Chavis, as well as Anthony Alford out here in the outfield, and even Quinn Priester, who is a prospect listed on our starting pitching rotation, we will get a good picture of where this range can lie. So if we go ahead and take a look at 2023, every single one of those players will still be on this list. First, take a look at Mitch Keller, who is playing really well on the season. So far through this season, he has played 12 games, has a 6-2 record, and a 2.63 ERA, which speaks to his potential as a pitcher and speaks to his performance so far on the season. And that is why they project a big jump from year 1 to year 2 for Mitch Keller. He goes from a 76 projected to an 82, and that is a jump of 6 overall ratings, akin almost to Bryan Reynolds. However, Mitch Keller is pretty much performing at that same ability. He's performing very well, almost as if he were an ace in the rotation. Now, maybe his performance isn't quite as good as Bryan Reynolds, but I think there is a little bit of evidence there to support that despite the massive performance out of both of these players, an A potential player has the ability to develop quicker still than a B potential player. And you're seeing that with the huge jump of 10 overalls for Bryan Reynolds as opposed to only 6 for Mitch Keller, who has B potential. Taking a look at another player that has played really well in the minors, Quinn Priester is projected to go from a 70 to a 74. So again, kind of exceeding expectations, and we're seeing pretty good development out of him. But let's go ahead and take a look at those other guys that I mentioned. Michael Chavis, who really has performed at a standard level, not poorly, not great, is only projected to go from a 77 to a 78, and Anthony Alford in the outfield is only projected to go from a 73 to a 76, and he has played slightly above average. And so what I'm saying here is that we can see kind of a wider distribution of what you can expect out of B potential players. Again, you can probably expect some minimal amount of progression from those players, about 1 to 2 overalls per season, despite their performance. A player could be underperforming, like a Michael Chavis is for me, for example, but they're still projected to go up 1 or 2 overall, and they still will go up 1 or 2 overall just based off of training and based on playing time. However, you will get an array of ability to perform above that and develop past that, as we noted with the other players on the roster, such as Quinn Priester and Mitch Keller. The ceiling for amount of development that is possible here, though, seems to be a little bit more capped than it is with A potential players. You're going to get less automatic development from these players. It seems with A potential players, you're getting an automatic 3 to 4 overall points of development, whereas with B potential players, you're getting an automatic maybe 1, maybe 2 points of development, and for performance beyond that, you have the potential to go up to 6, 7 points above that, whereas with A potential players, as we saw with Bryan Reynolds, you potentially have the ability to go 10 or more points above their existing rating on their development. Next up, we're going to take a look at C potential, where development is going to be much more difficult for players and much more dependent on their actual performance. For our C potential guys, we're going to take a look at starting pitcher JT Brubaker, infielder Diego Castillo, and catcher Reese McGuire. These players all have C potential for our team, and the projections for these players are going to be much more minimal. Now, this is not to say that a prospect down in the minor leagues isn't going to experience development at C potential, but you don't really have a good way to demonstrate that with this tool. You can still expect a little bit of development per year from those players, players, but as we've seen here, we can expect it to be much more minimal at that C potential, and anything below that is going to be extremely difficult to get progression out of those players despite performance. So taking a look at JT Brubaker, for example, he actually starts off as a 75 overall. Now, it is worth keeping in mind that all of these players that I've picked so far have been below the age of 30, and that is because at around the age of 30, MLB will really start to regress players, and some players will regress harder than others, especially depending on their potential, but I wanted to get more of a look at players under the age of 30 that still have development left in them to see what's actually going to happen with these players. So JT Brubaker is 28 years old. He's going to be one of the older players that we look at on this list, but I still think it's valuable to look at him nonetheless. Reid McGuire is actually going to be 27 years old, and to balance that out, since they are on the older end there, Diego Castillo is only 24 years old. However, whenever we go from 2022 to 2023 on these players, Diego Castillo stays at a 73 overall, and that could be because his potential may not be much higher than that 73 overall. Whenever we take a look at a player like JT Brubaker, for example, he only goes from that 75 to a 76, and then for Reid McGuire, he only goes from a 77 to a 79. Now again, that could be dependent on their specific number because C potential can go anywhere from a 70 to a 79, but I think this demonstrates pretty easily what you can expect out of some of these players despite performance. Some of these players have played well for me. JT Brubaker has played well for me, and Reid McGuire has played well for me, and on the high end, we're expecting 1, if not 2 overall points in development from these players. Likewise, on a whole, whenever I've seen throughout testing for my minor league system, that's pretty much the same thing you can expect is a couple points of development if they play well. If they don't play well, they tend to stagnate. But what can we actually take away from this video? Because this is not perfect testing to show you guys exactly how these players progress. In fact, I want to do a whole separate video on that where I actually sim through seasons to see whether these players progress a certain amount going from one year to another and take a look at their potentials and their overalls. What I do want to tell you guys, however, and what I want you to take away from this video is that the depth chart tool can be a good guide for where your players can stand over time and what you can expect out of them in the future. So in my outfield, for example, if I don't want to sign Bryan Reynolds to a massive contract, I will want to look to see what do I have available to replace him. Well, Lonnie White isn't a potential player, and very far in the future, I can expect him to reach that around that 2026 mark. Ultimately, what you're seeing is the progression, the potential progression from those players to help you make decisions in your franchise mode, and it helps to have an understanding of how much progression you can possibly expect out of your players on a year-to-year basis. Like I said, this is not a perfect tool. It's not going to tell you exactly what all of the progressions are going to end up being, and it's not going to tell you exactly how much every single player is going to progress on a year-to-year basis, but it can be helpful, and it can help you guys get a quick reference guide for especially those that are not as experienced with franchise mode and want to know what's going to happen with all of these players in their farm system and in their major league team as you go throughout your franchise mode. So hopefully this information was useful to you, and if it was, leave a like down below, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more videos such as this. As always, I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you have a good one.